There are some people who just don't like the idea of pirates, and for a few of them, that dislike goes to an extreme level. That usually is the case with anti-pirate villains in Pirates of the Caribbean, the ones who aren't pirates themselves. Think in terms of Cutler Beckett, or as this video focuses on, Captain Armando Salazar. And Salazar is the latest in the line of the pirate hunting villains. His entire story revolves around a burning personal vengeance against Jack Sparrow, where frankly, he is far the weakest pirate villain in the franchise. Even though I've already called out Blackbeard as a terrible villain who doesn't live up to the legendary pirate image, the aura around Salazar somehow makes it worse and more pointless by the time this film ends. And a lot of that has to do with the movie's characterization of Jack Sparrow, which I've already talked about before. It's just how the entire attitude of the film feels like a profound betrayal of the character, but it's also because I never really felt the threat the way I did with Davy Jones. Jones had that tragic backstory, the curse forcing him to live on in the sea, where Salazar and his ghost crew doesn't quite hit the same way despite sort of following that path, or a bit more of other villains. And it's genuinely disappointing to say that, because this is Javier Bardem we're talking about, an actor who has delivered incredible villain performances like Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men and Raul Silva in Skyfall. There was real potential for a fantastic pirate villain here, but it seemed that the film barely seemed interested in giving anyone a strong story unless your name was Barbossa. Because for most of the movie, Salazar just broods. Sure, he gets a few impressive moments swallowing an entire pirate ship fleet, but beyond chasing Jack Sparrow, there really isn't much else to the character. And even with the trident of Poseidon in his grasp and a weakened, watered-down version of Jack Sparrow, he still doesn't succeed. And I can't help but this version of the villain had already been done better by Cutler Beckett himself, a man who hunts down pirates and piracy itself with a personal history tied to Jack. Beckett's pursuit felt like a proper side quest adventure, where with Salazar, it's a much weaker adventure where Jack is just getting manhandled the whole time. And in the end, Salazar just feels like patchwork of taking the DNA of every single other character before him. A cursed crew from one traumatic event like the first film, a ghost version of Davy Jones, and a relentless hunter like Beckett, without any of the great qualities that made those earlier villains work well. So in this vein, let's talk about Salazar as the ultimate anti-pirate villain in every sense of the word. And to start, what actually makes a pirate villain stand out in the franchise? What separates the memorable ones from the ones that fall flat? To understand why Salazar feels so weak, we have to look back at the villains who come from before him, especially Barbossa and most of the other villains that actually fit the pirate's vein. Starting with Barbossa, from the very first film, he is an instant classic. He's got the perfect pirate look with the hat, the monkey, and the dramatic flair, but it's more than aesthetics. He carries real menace because it's tied into Jack's personal history. He was his first mate, where he and the cursed crew feel dangerous because their curse is directly tied into their greed. They stole Aztec gold and it turned them into the living dead. That gives him a clear motivation that is both selfish and tragic. And he's not evil for evil's sake, he wants to end the curse and taste apples again as a pirate, and that little human detail makes him memorable. Barbossa is also a great foil to Jack Sparrow, where he's ruthless where Jack is chaotic. He's strategic where Jack is improvisational. They banter back and forth and their rivalry feels earned. And in the later films, when he evolves into a more of an anti-hero role, it still works because we understood where he was coming from in the beginning. And the same can be said for the other villains, where Davy Jones is the gold standard. Tragic, terrifying with that incredible curse design and emotional depth to his persona and background, where Cutler Beckett represents the institutional hatred of piracy and creates a completely different but equal effective kind of threat. And then, Blackbeard, despite his weakness, has that legendary pirate aura around him and still has aspects that make him more effective than Salazar to go on that journey and force Jack to go with him on that very adventure. He's active and a living pirate who feels like he belongs in that world and commands a crew. Salazar, by contrast, checks some of these boxes on paper but fails to deliver on that feeling. He has the vengeance motive, where he has the spooky ghost crew and has that Javier Bardem intensity, but it never gets into something greater than the sum of its parts. And that's what makes a pirate villain truly stand out. Not just the concept, but how well the film executes the character, their world, and their conflict with Jack. Barbossa nailed this aspect in the first film, and even Blackbeard to his extent nailed it better with his connection to Jack, despite what will happen. And that's why when you put Armando Salazar next to them, he feels like the weakest link in the chain despite that personal backstory with Jack Sparrow. And speaking of that, let's actually talk about Salazar's backstory and why the way he is. In Dead Men Tell No Tales, we learned that Captain Armando Salazar was once a proud officer in the Spanish Navy, a fierce hunter of pirates who earned this terrifying reputation. He and his crew wiped out countless pirate ships and everything and earned a great record. But everything changed when he crossed paths with the young Jack Sparrow. At the time, Jack Sparrow was just young, a clever, cocky boy captained under a big ship. He wasn't captain yet, but he comes into this when Salazar kills his captain. captain. Salazar, full of arrogance and hatred for pirates, chased him down into Devil's Triangle, and with his signature tricks, he pulls off one of the most daring trips and the best scene in the entire film while Salazar's massive ship sailed straight into the supernatural trap. The triangle destroyed the ship, killed most of the crew, and left Salazar and the surviving men as ghosts, undead, rotting, and trapped in this internal moment. This single humiliating encounter became the core of Salazar's entire existence as a cursed captain. His undying rage is laser focused on Jack Sparrow whenever he goes. Every pirate he kills afterward is just practice. Jack is the one who got away. He's hunted so many pirates, but Jack is the reason he and his men are cursed to this half-life. That personal vendetta drives him completely, and on paper, this is a solid villain origin. It gives him clear reason to be the ultimate anti-pirate villain, a man who dedicated his entire life to eradicating piracy only to be destroyed by the very thing he hated the most. It explains the brooding intensity, the ghostly appearance, and the single-minded obsession. Javier Bardem even brings a heavy, wounded fury to the role that makes you believe how consumed he is by revenge. But here's where it starts to weaken in such execution. Unlike Davy Jones, whose cursed tragedy feels personal and mythic, Salazar's story is mostly told through quick flashbacks and exposition. Again, this is just one film rather than two of how they flesh that out. We don't spend enough time with the living Salazar to really feel that fall from the powerful naval captain to a vengeful ghost. That moment that defines him, that chase with young Jack, happens off-screen in the past, and we're most leftly with the angry aftermath. This makes his hatred feel a little one-note. He wants Jack dead more than anything, but because this film spends so much time on a weaker, less charming version of Jack, the rivalry never reaches the heights of Barbossa or even Beckett. Even with Barbossa, we understand his perspective from beginning to end, his journey with Elizabeth. Salazar here just ends up feeling like a ghost stuck on repeating the same angry lines about Jack Sparrow, while the movie just rushes towards its big set pieces. His backstory makes sense for why the way he is, a relentless, humorless anti-pirate force, but the film never quite turns that backstory into something emotionally gripping or cinematically unforgettable. It's just there, and it doesn't land with the weight it should have had. And in this aspect, now we could take a look at his journey before the final act and how he operates as a ghost pirate captain that once escaped Devil's Triangle. After Jack unwittingly frees him by giving away the compass, Salazar and his silent decaying crew burst out with pure vengeance on the seas. They immediately become a terror at seas once again, hunting down any pirate ships that come out with ruthless efficiency. We see them ripping through entire fleets, ships being swallowed, torn apart, or left as wrecks. And as a ghost crew, they can walk on water, phase through obstacles, and fight without that fear of death, unless they go on land. It's visually striking and gives Salazar a real sense of supernatural power. During this stretch of the film, young Henry Turner is out there searching for a way to break his father's curse. He witnessed the devastation Salazar is causing firsthand, where Henry knows that the new threat could destroy everything, but there's not much he could do alone, and that's where Barbossa comes in. As a former pirate who's somewhat legendary and secretly connected to Salazar's past through the Black Pearl, Barbossa steps up to explain the gravity of the situation. He carries that grief and understanding of where the ghost captain is coming from, and Barbossa is leveling the playing field here between Jack's past and of course pirates present. Barbossa's moments here help scale the threat and give us the much needed exposition through Salazar's history. However, here's where the real tension starts to slip. While Salazar is out there being the big scary mean ghost pirate hunter, Jack Sparrow is mostly off doing his own thing, dealing with his own problems, trying to regain his luck, and stumbling through the plot in a much weaker version of the character we love. The film really never builds a sense that Salazar is closing in on Jack in a meaningful, suspenseful way early on. The threat feels real to the wider pirate world, but because Jack isn't directly facing it for large portions of the movie, it loses some of that personal edge. Again, if we had the true Jack Sparrow in this film, Salazar would have been hindered at every turn, like in the some subtle ways that Jack Sparrow actually dented Davy Jones back in Dead Man's chest. But we don't see that here because the film never wants to do that. And Salazar is at his most threatening when he's systematically destroying pirate fleets and declaring his intent to end every last pirate. That anti-pirate crusade is generally compelling in theory, but in practice it often plays out as Salazar and his crew simply waiting for the plot to bring Jack to them, rather than actively hunting him down in a way that creates constant pressure. He just stopped here and has to be forced to work with Barbossa to actually get to that plot. So by the time we head into the final act, we have this powerful ghost captain who should feel like an unstoppable force, but the way the story structures his pursuit leaves him feeling pretty held back a bit until the final confrontation. And then of course reaching it, it's kind of disappointing. After chasing Jack and the group to the island where the Trident of Poseidon is hidden, Salazar's obsession hits that peak. Once he gets his hands on the Trident, he becomes completely unhinged. waving it around like a madman, screaming about ending all pirates and finally getting his revenge on Jack. But then of course Henry destroys the trident in one swift move, where all curses tied to the sea are broken, where for the first time in years, they are human again. And that's exactly where the movie makes its most frustrating choice. Instead of letting them escape or giving them any real weight to the moment of humanity, the film has them trapped on a sinking ship. They're left to drown helplessly on the ocean floor as they get reclaimed. Barbossa, in a generally heroic and tragic sacrifice, does go down with them, using the last of his strength to save Karina and the others. His death lands emotionally because we spent years with the character and perfect for his end, but for Salazar and his crew, it just feels stupid and inconsequential. I get where the filmmakers were going for in this sense. There's a tragic irony here. Salazar finally gets what he wanted, to be free of his ghostly curse, only to lose everything immediately after and not get the man he was searching for. He dies a man instead of a monster, where there's supposed to be a sense of poetic justice in an anti-pirate villain being swallowed by the very sea he hates pirates were actually ruling. Yet it falls flat. The moment lacks impact, where we never get enough time to care about Salazar as a person beyond his rage. So his momentary return to humanity and quick death just doesn't carry real emotional weight. It feels more convenient way to wrap up the villain rather than a meaningful conclusion. Compare that to Davy Jones' complex heartbreaking fate or Barbossa's earlier deaths that actually felt earned. Salazar in the end just feels rushed and unsatisfying, where the moment mostly focuses on Barbossa's sacrifice for his daughter. In the end, his journey here, from terrifying ghost captain to trident-wielding madman to briefly human again and dead, just does not leave a lasting impression. The tragedy is there on paper, but it never connects. So overall, Salazar does end up being a disappointing villain. The movie tried to do so much with him in one film, introducing a new big bad, bringing back that supernatural ghost angle, hunting for the Trident of Poseidon, and giving Henry and Karina their own stories, where it also gives Barbossa a big send-off and all somehow ties it back to Jack. It's overloaded, and because of that, almost gets nothing done in the depth that it needs. At the center of this is just a vengeance-driven anti-pirate villain who, unlike most of the franchise's best antagonists, does not have a thorough or meaningful history with Jack. Beckett had years prior to the film's connection, and Barbossa had that long rivalry. Even Davy Jones had layers that made the conflicts with Jack feel personal, or even Blackbeard. Salazar's entire relationship with Jack boils down to one trick when Jack was a kid, and that's it, and the film never builds on that enough to make us feel the weight of that very grudge. Add in the heavily weakened, almost parody version of Jack Sparrow that the movie gives us, and Salazar never gets a proper rival to get pushed against. You can't have a great villain without a great hero or anti-hero to play off on, and this film dropped the ball hard on both sides of the equation except for Barbossa. Javier Bardem did deserve better, and so did Johnny Depp. The concept of a ruthless, ghost-like anti-pirate hunter had potential, but it was wasted in a crowded story that never gave Salazar or the audience the time to focus on what needed to be made to make it truly memorable. In the end, Captain Armando Salazar stands as the weakest of the major Pirates of the Caribbean villains, not because the idea was bad, but because the execution left them feeling like a half-finished ghost that could have been better. So where do we go for here if we ever get another Pirates of the Caribbean movie for a villain? If we're going to get a new strong character, I'd rather see something fresh. Newer blood, a newer generation of antagonists who feel like they belong to the closing era of piracy, not just another grudge holder like Salazar. We see here that Jack is getting older, the golden age of piracy is winding down, and the world is changing, with empires cracking down harder and the seas becoming less wild, in the age where America is starting to get its founding. Instead of another ghost or undead figure chasing an ancient vendetta, we should give a villain who represents the changing world, someone ambitious, modern in their brutality, and rising up right now. A new captain or a cunning naval officer who sees piracy's end as an opportunity, not a personal trauma from decades ago. We've already done cursed crews, the legendary undead hunters, and the institutional anti-pirate forces. Salazar was just the latest version of that very same formula, and it showed how stale it became. A newer generation villain could create real tension with the older, wiser Jack Sparrow, not just repeating that Jack Sparrow ruined my life story we've seen from before. Bring in someone who forces Jack to confront legacy he left behind rather than running from the ghost of his past. That would feel exciting and fit for this point in the timeline, because this age of pirates cannot last forever. It's stuck in this same time period and only in there. Salazar, on the other hand, had potential to be a solid villain, but he's a perfect example of why we need to move past recycling the same anti-pirate revenge tropes, where next time, you should get a villain who feels dangerous because they represent the future, not because they're stuck raging about the past of a pirate's life for them. I'm all done. Goodbye.